5 cuttings sit in one terracotta pot. 4 bases are black, one stem is still green, and under the soil there is finally a white root. That was my first lesson with the stubborn herb near the end of this list. The second lesson mattered more. I had been treating August like the end of herb season, when it is actually the moment to make next year's plants. Rosemary, sage, thyme, lavender, and 5 others are the ones worth checking now. Wait too long and that window starts closing. So I'm going through 9 herbs you can root for free this August, starting with the easy ones and saving the stubborn one for near the end. 4 of mine went black before one rooted. Yours does not have to surprise you. Number 1. Rosemary. 3 inches, 6 weeks, that's it. Here's the part most people get backwards about rosemary. You don't need a green thumb to make more of it. You need 3 inches of this year's growth and about 6 weeks of patience. Most people never stop to ask why they keep replacing the same plant. Rosemary hardens at the base, flowers less, or just doesn't make it through a cold winter. And the answer is always the same trip back to the garden center. Here's what nobody tells you at checkout. The plant you're about to replace is also the source for the next one. A new pot from the store, or one clean cut with kitchen scissors from the bush you already have. Multiply that by every year you would have bought it again, and it stops being a real choice. Timing decides whether this works. You want a stem that's firm down at the base, but still soft and green at the tip. Not the tender new growth from June. Not last year's fully hardened wood. Too soft, and it rots before it can root. Too hard, and the outer layer is too tough for a root to break through. Right now, in August, rosemary sits exactly in that window. Old-school gardeners have grouped rosemary, sage, and lavender together for this exact kind of cutting for about as long as anyone's been keeping notes. Cut a piece 4 to 6 inches long. Push it about 2 inches deep into loose, well-draining soil. Keep it evenly moist, never soaked, somewhere with bright, indirect light. Give it 4 weeks, then tug gently. Resistance means roots. You've bought the same rosemary plant 3 summers in a row because it never makes it through winter where you live. This time, before the frost even shows up, you take a piece of it with you. No more starting over. If you're in zone 6 or colder, the parent plant outside might not survive winter at all. Cut early in August instead of waiting, and keep the rooted piece indoors through its first winter. 3 inches of stem, 6 weeks. That's the whole transaction. Number 2. Common sage. Same plant, same flavor, $0. Put the receipt for your last sage plant next to a pair of scissors. One of those gets you a new plant for free. A sage bush ages the same way rosemary does. The lower stems toughen and go bare, the leaves thin out, and the harvest shrinks every year. Most people read that as a dying plant and go buy a fresh one. I set an old bush next to a store-bought sage once and grew them side by side, and there was no real difference. Crush a leaf from either plant and you get the same sage smell. I could not tell the new pot from the old bush by the foliage. That's not luck. A cutting is a piece of the exact plant you started with, not a gamble on what a seed might grow into. If your sage plant looks more like a small woody shrub than the soft bush it was 2 summers ago, that's not a dying plant. That's a plant handing you free cuttings. Cut a piece 4 to 5 inches long from a stem that hasn't flowered, right below a leaf node. Strip the leaves off the bottom third, then push it into damp, loose soil. Give it 3 to 4 weeks and you'll feel the tug of new roots holding it in place. One way costs a trip to Lowe's or Home Depot for a fresh pot every couple of years. The other costs nothing but the scissors already in your kitchen drawer. If your sage bush has gone completely stiff with no soft new growth left anywhere, skip it for now. Look for a younger shoot pushing up from the base instead. That's where the next cutting comes from. Same flavor, same plant, technically, $0. Number 3. Common thyme, the fastest root on this whole list. Inside that little stem you're about to cut, there's already a decision being made, and you can't see it happening. Thyme spreads fast on top, but the center hollows out and stiffens after 2 or 3 years. Not dead, just tired. Most people notice the bare middle, assume the plant is finished, and drive to the store for a replacement. What they're missing is that a healthy edge of that same plant is right there, ready to become a whole new one. Here's what's actually going on when you cut it. The plant doesn't grow a root because it decided to. It's reacting to an injury. Growth hormone floods down toward the cut, pooling at the lowest living point on the stem. Once enough of it collects in one cluster of cells, that cluster turns into root instead of stem or leaf. That's why you strip the lower leaves before planting. Fewer leaves pulling water up means more energy stays at the cut, doing the one job that gets you a new plant. Once you see that, the rest makes sense. Take a 3 to 4 inch piece from a young stem. Push it 2 inches into loose soil. Keep it moist, out of direct sun. Roots show up in 2 to 3 weeks, faster than anything else on this list. You snip a few sprigs for dinner anyway. Instead of composting the extras, 3 go straight into a pot of damp soil on the counter. Skip a bush that's gone hollow all the way through. Cut from the outer edge, where the new growth still is. That's 1 more year you didn't pay for a plant you already own. Fastest roots on this whole list, not even close. Number 4. English lavender. Skip the seed packet entirely. Everyone assumes growing more lavender means starting over from seed. That is the slow way, and most people who try it quit halfway through. I used to think seed was the cheap way in, until I timed it against a cutting. Seed drags its feet. Lavender seed can take a month to break the surface, and it comes up ragged, some seedlings racing ahead, others barely poking through. If your yard grows more than 1 lavender variety, the bees have already been cross-pollinating behind your back, so the seeds you collect can throw a plant with a different bloom color, a weaker scent, even a different height than the parent. A cutting skips that gamble entirely. It carries the mother plant's exact bloom color, scent, and size with it. No guessing involved. So skip the seed packet and go straight to the pruners. This is where the money adds up fastest on this whole list. Lavender at the big box store usually comes in 4 to 6 inch pots, and gardeners rarely buy just one. Most people want a border or a low hedge, which means 5, 10, sometimes 20 pots at once. That's not one plant you'd be replacing, that's a whole row. Cut a stem that hasn't flowered, 4 to 6 inches long. Lavender hates wet feet worse than any other herb you'll cut this way, so mix equal parts sand or perlite into your potting soil before you push the cutting in. Give it 4 to 6 weeks. Nurseries have been starting their lavender stock from cuttings off an established plant, not from seed, for longer than anybody can put a date on. There's a trick that gets passed around lavender growing forums, and it's simpler than anything on a seed packet. Gardeners have been rooting lavender from cuttings for generations, long before anyone wrote it down as a technique. It just works. I cannot point you to one single formal study proving cutting beats seed for a home garden. But I can point you to a windowsill full of identical lavender plants that all came from one mother plant. And that is proof enough for most people who try it once. Munstead and Hidcut are the 2 workhorses for cold gardens. Treat Zone 5 as the reliable outdoor line and give colder gardens winter protection to push their luck. If your soil is heavy clay, root the cutting in a pot instead of straight in the ground, at least until it's established. Wet, heavy soil kills more lavender cuttings than cold ever does. Skip the seed packet entirely. The fastest lavender you'll ever grow is already standing in your yard. If this level of detail on rooting your own lavender is what you've been looking for, subscribe and hit the bell. Every video, same level of specific. But stick around. The herb near the end of this list is the one almost everyone assumes you cannot grow from a clipping at all. And I will show you why that is only half true. Number 5. Winter Savory, still green when everything else quits. This is the herb most people have never planted, and it's also the one still alive in your garden when everything else has gone dormant. Winter Savory doesn't get the attention rosemary or sage does, and that works against you at the nursery. Fewer growers stock it, so tracking one down costs more and takes longer. It's evergreen too, holding its leaves through winter in most zones while the rest of your herb bed goes bare. That alone is worth the trouble. Same cutting method as the rest of this batch, taken from a half-woody stem in August. 3 to 4 inches, into loose, lean soil that drains fast. Skip the fertilizer while it roots. Give it 3 to 5 weeks. If you've never grown this one, you're not alone, but it's worth having. If only for the sprig you can still snip in late fall when everything else in the bed has gone brown. Zone 5 through 8 is safe ground outdoors. Colder than that? Keep the cutting inside its first winter. The one herb still green when the rest of the bed gives up. Number 6. Santolina, the border you've been pricing out for free. Most people who have Santolina think of it as decoration. It's actually doing a job. Those silvery ball-shaped mounds along the front of a flower bed look purely ornamental, and most gardeners plant them for that reason alone. But the sharp, almost medicinal scent that gives Santolina its bite has been used for generations as a natural barrier around vegetable beds, keeping certain pests from wandering in. Treat it as decoration only, and you're missing half of what the plant does. Because everyone buys it as a border plant. Everyone buys it in bulk, the same way lavender shoppers do. The difference is, Santolina costs less per pot, so almost nobody stops to think about propagating it instead. Of everything on this list, this is the one people overlook the most for free plants. And that's precisely why it earns a spot here. Free plants, hiding in plain sight. Santolina wants the same dry treatment lavender does, a 4 to 6 inch non-flowering stem, into fast-draining soil since it hates wet roots just as much as lavender does. Cut early in the morning while the plant still holds moisture. Midday heat wilts a cutting before it ever reaches the soil. Roots show up in 4 to 6 weeks. You've been eyeing a longer border of that silvery plant along your walkway for 2 summers now, doing the math on how many pots that would take at the garden center. This doesn't hold up below Zone 6 without winter protection, thick mulch and a spot out of the wind. The border you've been pricing out at the garden center is already growing in your yard. 2 more after this. The second to last one is going to test your patience more than anything else on this list. Number 7. Lemon Verbena, 1 clipping, a lifetime of tea. Zoom out for a second. One cutting this size becomes a shrub that can fill a gallon pot with tea leaves by next summer. Start with a 4-inch piece of stem. That's it. By the end of 1 growing season, that piece has turned into a bush big enough to keep you in fresh tea leaves through winter. Nothing else in this whole lineup scales up that fast from that little material. I ran the math on this one, and lemon verbena came out on top for value. It's the strongest lemon scent of any herb you can grow, and because it's less common than rosemary or thyme, nurseries price it higher than almost anything else in the herb section. 1 rooted cutting sidesteps that markup completely, and it keeps sidestepping it every year the plant lives. 1 quirk, though. This one is propagated from softer, younger growth rather than half-woody stems, so pick the newest, flexible tip you can find. Cut a 4-inch piece and push it into loose, moist soil. Roots show up within a few weeks. If every tip on the plant has already hardened, wait for next spring's growth instead of forcing an August cutting. If the only lemon verbena you've ever had was in a tea bag from the store, 1 cutting on your windowsill changes that by next spring. This is the tender one, below Zone 8. It won't survive planted straight in the ground through winter. Root it, then keep it potted so you can bring it indoors before the first hard frost. 1 clipping, 1 pot. A lifetime supply of tea that never came from a bag. Number 8. Bay laurel, the priciest herb, the hardest root. This is the one herb almost everyone assumes you simply cannot grow from a clipping at home. That assumption is wrong, but the reason people believe it is worth knowing before you try. Bay laurel costs more at the nursery than any other plant in this lineup. It grows slowly, so growers charge more for a mature one. And it's the only herb here where an extension source comes right out and admits the cutting is hard to root. Both of those facts point at the same thing. This plant is genuinely different from the other 8. I used to think a cutting that wouldn't root meant I'd done something wrong. Bay laurel is the one that proved me wrong. It's not you. The leaves themselves are the problem. Bay leaves are thick and glossy, coated in a waxy layer that locks moisture in. That waxy coat is great at keeping a leaf from drying out on a cutting. It also slows the stem down while it is trying to switch over and start making roots. The plant defends itself so well that the defense gets in its own way. Cut 4 to 6 inches of stem that's part hardened at the base. Strip off some of the leaves to cut down on water loss and push it into loose soil. Keep it evenly damp. Where most of this list roots in weeks, bay laurel can take months, and not every piece makes it. Cut 5 or 6 pieces instead of 1 or 2 to cover for that. The first time I tried rooting bay laurel, I cut 5 pieces the same afternoon I did the rosemary, same pot, same soil, same spot on the windowsill. 6 weeks later, the rosemary was rooted and ready to pot up. 4 of the 5 bay cuttings had gone black at the base. The 5th one just sat there, doing nothing, for another 2 months before a single white root finally showed up. University of Illinois Extension says it plainly. Bay laurel cuttings can be taken, but they're difficult to root. Zone 8 to 10 outdoors. Below that, it lives in a pot you bring inside for winter. This isn't a fast win. Skip it if you need a guaranteed result by next season. Treat it as a long experiment, not your main plan for getting a bay laurel plant. It's the priciest herb here to buy, and the hardest one here to root for free. Those 2 facts are not a coincidence. Number 9. Hyssop, the herb almost nobody has ever grown. Last one, and it's the herb with the longest history of any plant here, and most people have never grown a single stem of it. Hyssop barely shows up in the average American backyard, even though it's been in gardens for centuries. It roots the same way rosemary, lavender, and sage do, grouped right alongside them in the propagation guides. But almost nobody plants it, so almost nobody thinks to propagate it either. Here's why it earns the closing spot. Bees and pollinators go for hyssop harder than they go for most of the other herbs in this lineup, and it keeps blooming from midsummer into early fall, right when a lot of your other flowers have already quit for the year. Free bee food for 2 extra months from a plant most people walk right past without noticing. That's a small thing that adds up over a whole season in the yard. Cut a 3 to 4 inch piece of half-hardened stem from a non-flowering shoot. Push it into soil that's neutral to a little on the alkaline side. Well drained. No fertilizer while it's rooting. Roots show up in 3 to 5 weeks, right in the middle of the pack for speed. Nothing fussy about this one. An old gardener I know, the kind who has a name for every bee that shows up in her yard, grows a short row of hyssop along her fence for one simple reason. She says it's the last thing blooming when everything else has given up for the year, and the bees know it before she does. She gave me 3 cuttings off that row one August afternoon. All 3 took root. No fuss, no losses. Zone 4 through 9. No warning label needed here. This is one of the easier plants in the whole batch to get going. 9 herbs, and the last one is the herb most people have never even heard of. Until now. 9 plants. 9 clippings. Every single one of them was already growing in a yard somewhere before you spent $1 on it. That's the whole idea behind this list. Not that propagation is some special skill, but that most of what you'd buy again this fall, you're already holding in your hand every time you prune. You already own the starting material. One more thing that works across all 9 of these, no matter which one you're cutting, take your cuttings first thing in the morning, before the heat of the day pulls moisture out of them. And once they're in soil, a clear plastic bag loosely draped over the pot, not sealed tight, keeps the humidity up so the cutting isn't fighting to survive while it's trying to root. So here's what to do next. Tomorrow morning, before the heat sets in, cut 3 pieces off your rosemary or your sage, 4 to 6 inches, right below a leaf node. Drop them straight into a glass of water on your windowsill. No rooting hormone for this first step. Just don't let those clippings end up in the compost. The nursery wants you to believe good herbs take years and money. Your pruning shears say otherwise.